Dear YouTube enthusiasts, welcome to Real Turkey channel. As far as we know, the only English broadcast from Turkey covering Turkish news, politics, economics, sexual affairs and scandals. Usually the lack of competition is a good thing, but sometimes it means there is no demand for the service. In our case, it's probably that because no one is watching these. But we're going to take care of this problem by creating demand. We might start a war or an Istanbul earthquake. Anyhow, today's subject is our president's visit to Washington, D.C. He's going to see the American president, Mr. Donald J. Trump. They're going to discuss several very important issues, probably the fate of Earth as well as human-eating aliens harassing our borders in Mars again. All joking aside, I titled this video "Last Stop Before Sanctions" because Mr. Erdogan needs to resolve certain thorny issues with Mr. Trump, but that's not enough. He also needs to establish contact with certain members of the Congress, at least one member of the Congress who still talks to Turkey, and make a good case for Turkey's conduct in the region, so that Congress, itching for sanctions against Turkey, stops the whole process. What is Mr. Erdogan going to talk about? His agenda is pretty obvious. First of all, of course, our military campaign in northeast Syria called Operation Peace Spring. He claims Americans haven't fulfilled their promise of ditching the Kurdish entity, which we call terrorists, YPG, PYD. And they didn't. Trump said he's going to pull his soldiers out of Syria, and in fact he did. But 6 hours later, he changed his mind. The soldiers came back from Iraq and started defending the oil wells, which are currently controlled by YPG. So YPG not only has the defensive umbrella, as well as all the oil revenues, which obviously doesn't please Turkey. Second, of course, the Halkbank issue, of which you will see a video downstairs or next doors. Halkbank is a Turkish state lender which is currently on trial in a Manhattan federal court for allegedly violating Iran sanctions and allegedly money laundering. Mr. Erdogan wants this case to vanish by Trump. I don't know how that's possible. The extradition of the Turkish Sunni pastor Fethullah Gulen, who is the mastermind behind the abortive 2016 coups, as well as a request for Turkey to be admitted to the F-35 fighter jet program. And finally, this very ambitious free trade deal between Turkey and the United States, which would presumably jack up our mutual trade to $100 billion a year. Well, if the National Security Advisor, Mr. Robert O'Brien, I believe is to be believed, America has other fish to fry. Mr. Trump, too, is extremely angry that Turkey is buying Russian-made anti-missile system S-400s, which Mr. Erdogan has vowed to activate before the end of the year, which is a sanctionable act under the Caatsa Act, C-A-A-T-S-A. Another reason why Congress is extremely angry in Turkey. Mr. O'Brien said at CBS Face the Nation program that this is simply not acceptable and Turkey will be sanctioned if S-400s are activated. There are other issues which Trump may or may not raise, but these are important to Congress. Congress thinks Turkey doesn't abide by the Syria demarcation zone agreement signed by Vice President Mike Pence and our President, Mr. Erdogan. There are very ugly and heartbreaking allegations of Turkey's military ally, Syrian National Army, abusing Kurdish citizens. I wasn't there, so I'm not a party to this, but there is footage floating around in the social media. You make your own judgment. The Congress wants Turkey to be punished for these alleged uses of alleged abuses of human rights and war crimes, as well as a new sanctions bill advanced by Senators Menendez and Risch, I believe, but I may be wrong, for Turkey using American-provided weapons for objectives not stated in the contract. This is why it is as important for Mr. Erdogan to reach a compromise with Trump on the issues discussed, as well as to reach out to the Congress and to explain why Turkey is in Syria, what we're trying to accomplish, how we're fighting against Assad, actually, and why, if not the entire YPG-PYD, then large segment of this entity is affiliated to the terror organization PKK, and they do cause harm to Turkey, and we need to push them away from our borders. Whether he will be able to do so is a great question mark. The American President Trump is kind of unpredictable. I mean, it's kind of hard to guess what he's doing. So is Mr. President Erdogan. Erdogan may go to the United States bringing certain gifts in his bag. One of them is that he may defer the activation of S-400s. He may propose to establish an international tribunal to investigate discharges of human rights abuses. He may, offer Trump a closer alliance against Iran. This is one thing. This is the good case scenario, in which case I'm sure Trump will be able to convince enough Republican senators to support his veto, and the sanctions will be delayed or will be tabled forever. Or Mr. Erdogan may turn out to be in a bad mood. He may be defiant. He may once again ignore the Congress and, clearly state that we are going to use S-400s and we're going to push against the American demarcation zone in Syria and deny all the accusations against war crimes. This, I'm afraid, will be the last straw that break the camel's back, in the sense that despite Mr. Trump's good offices, it would be well nigh impossible to stop congressional sanctions. These are pretty heavy. They involve CAATSA sanctions, financial sanctions, an embargo against military supplies to Turkey, and perhaps a ban on supranational institutions on lending to Turkey. Most importantly, it's not the sanctions, but the threat of sanctions that stops foreign investors in transacting Turkey, and foreign commercial banks to become extremely reluctant to lend to Turkey. For those of you who watch Turkey closely, they may remember the Pastor Andrew Brunson affair, the summer of 2018. He was detained in Turkey for being a member of a Sunni Muslim terrorist organization. Mr. Trump asked him to be released. Mr. Erdogan resisted for 10 days. During those 10 days, Turkish lira lost approximately 30% against the dollar. At the end, the Free Turkish Judiciary decided to release Andrew Brunson, but the Turkish lira's devaluation immediately spread over to inflation. We had a huge boost in inflation. Turkish corporates are heavily indebted. By then, in FX, by then they had a short position FX of roughly $220 billion. There was a major shakedown. Several large corporates had to defer their loans. Others sought Chapter 11 protection. Turkish economy has entered a recession. Sanctions this time would finish the job. Last time they were like a bullet to the stomach, which didn't kill but impaired the patient, put him in a hospital. This time the bullet will be to the head and Turkey will be brain dead. I hope Mr. Erdogan knows what he's doing. We have full trust in our president. But November 13, in American time, is a key date. If by November 13 or November 14 he doesn't come back with a deal, not only with Trump, but something that appeases American Congress, Turkish markets or the economy are not safe for anyone, at least not for the Turks. You have watched the Turkey channel. If you like it, please visit our videos and subscribe, or better, just watch the goddamn thing, will you? Bye-bye now. I'm Atilla Yaşalada.